I actually wanted to start this off by asking you all what sustainability means, and feel free to drop it in the chat. I can give a little bit of time to go over a couple other things as you all think about what sustainability means. And it doesn't have to be something that you drop in immediately. It could be throughout the course of me talking as well. But in regards to an official definition that I researched about from Oxford's definition, sustainability is avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. And when looking into something like that, it's hard for me to kind of digest that information when a definition is given like that. And it honestly just feels boring because sustainability is so limited to that. And since English is not my native language, I felt that it wasn't very encompassing of the sustainability that I came to know and love. And so I researched further to see if there were any other established definitions, and came across a definition by the United Nations, Brundtland Commission in 1987. They actually define sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I really like this definition because it's not limiting, it's also giving the space to add on to it, and just give different perspectives of what sustainability can also look like based on others' experiences. And as the definition of sustainability is ever evolving, I think it's important to look at sustainability in plain and understandable words, especially since the term was actually developed in 1970s. And it's how basically sustainability came to be known. And I am seeing some stuff in the chat, so I want to see what's going on. Sustainability equals a world where we all can thrive. My informational definition is usually a balance and harmony between people and planet, coexisting with Mother Nature, accounting for the needs of 7 generations ahead, and teaching. I love those. Those are amazing. That's so awesome. Yes. I love that sustainability can be known as something that's good for the environment, good for people, but keeps on expanding. And that's why I wanted to talk about holistic sustainability as well. And I hope in this little speech that I'll be giving that the main takeaways are that we have the opportunity to shape what and how sustainability looks like, as it's an emerging topic and can drastically change the way others see sustainability, while also helping us all expand our knowledge of holistic sustainability and how we can go about day-to-day activities as well as business operations. I love sustainability because no matter how big or small the changes you make in your lifestyle or actions you take, it all makes a difference. For example, my take on implementing sustainable practices into my lifestyle has changed from week to week, and I started my sustainable journey about 6 years ago. And honestly, every week, every day can look completely different from the other. I first started my sustainable journey back in high school when a friend and I started talking about sustainability and how we wanted to introduce the subject to students at our school, as it wasn't an actual subject taught in classes, which is crazy to me. In the first couple weeks of creating Green Club, yes, very basic, but it was us in high school. I found out about the Green Camp partnership and quickly trained to become a steward and active volunteer for the next couple of years. I took my experience moving forward into my college life at UW by joining the Student Sustainability Coalition on campus, and also became their treasurer, which was a pretty cool experience. These experiences, as well as others not mentioned, got me curious about minoring in something that relates to it, because at the time I was getting my business management major degree. And I was like, maybe I should just switch my major. But I also really love business. So I stuck to that, and I did some research into minors, and came across our at UW, it's called corporate responsibility. But I like to call it corporate social responsibility, as it's more encompassing of what I learned and I'll refer to it as CSR if it's not something that has been known previously. And I honestly fell in love with that minor, and it showed me a whole nother way of approaching sustainable practices and being sustainable or being an advocate, and kind of just like understanding that sustainability is more than just let's go hug a tree or something, which is common cliches that are given about it. And it was a very eye-opening experience to go into this minor, especially because in my business management courses, there was no insight to sustainability or any kind of ethical operations of businesses and a deeper understanding of environmental and social level justice, other than what makes a business an unlawful practice. And I think that's the bare minimum of what any business can do, is to be lawful. And I think that we need to shift our mindset from just doing business as business and something that can actually do good. And a quote that I learned in my minor was actually, it was do more good rather than do less harm. And that's something that has stuck with me throughout the years, and is something that I have tried to implement in whatever I'm doing. And then I wanted to shed light onto CSR, as I think that it's a very helpful tool when going about sustainable business, because it sets a beautiful framework. At baseline, I learned that there are 3 main sectors to consider in these sustainable practices, which are environmental, social, and governance efforts. Not only did this disband the cliches I had internalized about sustainability, it showed me that I had so many ways of approaching a sustainably conscious lifestyle. It showed me that I could do things professionally and personally that can help better the environment, all ecosystems, and government all at the same time. And I took my knowledge about business and corporate social responsibility and did my own independent CSR proposal report, where I pitched sustainable practices to 2 separate organizations that the business could either implement into their business model or as an add-on to their operations. I can go more into depth about these sustainable and CSR proposals during the questions period, but to give a brief explanation, these proposals consisted of me looking into organizations I feel could be implementing sustainable practices that would be beneficial to them. I would do research on the organization where the business could grow, and come up with sustainable practices that would be short-term investments and sometimes very low financial investments, and showcase how implementing these practices can cause the business to thrive if implemented into their business model. Which if anyone is thinking of going into sustainable consulting, is something we're seeing more and more businesses hiring and contracting for, as each generation become more aware of the effects that businesses operate, and how that has a direct effect on the environment or people and the planet. So I definitely would recommend doing a deeper dive into CSR if that is something of interest. And I can also speak more on that. This also then opened the door. All of these experiences combined opened the door for my independent contracting work for Dovetail Sustainability Consulting. And I was really nervous about doing this because it was like very official, it was confidential. We were working with large companies and trying to do research on how they're showcasing their brand, and if they're being authentic and transparent with their operations, and if they are actually causing more harm than doing more good. And it was an interesting experience for me to delve into as I was doing research on large corporate companies that may have been lacking on their sustainable reporting and materiality assessment, and look into ways to improve the information and practices of the company. This showed me the importance of reporting in a business, as well as transparency and authenticity in the operations. And if you're thinking of opening up a business or have already started a business, I would highly encourage you all to look into CSR practices, materiality assessments. That can be a little more difficult to understand, as there's some language that I wouldn't choose to explain what a materiality assessment is, but that's just because sometimes I need things in very plain, simple terms. Otherwise, it just goes over my head. So I would be glad to explain on that if you all would like. And then, as well as the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I really like that as a basis of looking into sustainable business operations, because it's very simple to look at what it is directly that you're going to be affecting if you choose to implement these sustainable practices in that category. So there's something like helping enrich our environment by I'm going to give a very basic example, by like planting trees, but that's going to help our ecosystem. That's going to help the oxygen for humans and for animals and all of that. And there's 17 goals that you can attach to each sustainable practice that you want to implement into your business. And this can show how a business is either, they can be greenwashing or they can be actually authentic in their practices. And that's something that I want to take with me as I am going to go into business or in business and want to start my own business, because I don't want to come across as greenwashing and just going about business in ethical ways. So with that said, after graduating, I decided to create an Instagram account called Sustainably Raihab to encourage others to learn about sustainability. And this is actually where a lot of my mistakes came into play. Although my intentions were good, I thought that every person that followed me or liked my posts were sustainability lovers and they were just ready to take on the world. Every single thing that I post, they're gonna go out and do that. And I was wrong, but that's okay. And it was frustrating to see that people seemed like they liked the content, but weren't keen on actually implementing these practices into their life, which is perfectly fine. Everyone has their own ways about going life. And it's also, there's a lot of inequities surrounding sustainable practices and being able to, because in this day and age or throughout time, there's a lot of capitalism for everything. And so right now, sustainable practices are definitely being capitalized on. And I would like to introduce the topic of being sustainable in ways that you don't have to, financially invest a lot into, because that was a misconception that I had when I started my Instagram account. I felt that I had to buy all of the sustainable products. I had to go out of my way to not go out to eat because all of the harm that could come from takeout or something like that. And I want to kind of disband that idea where you have to completely shift your entire lifestyle in order to be helpful of the environment, because there's many ways to go about it, by advocating or by reaching out to large corporations and holding them accountable and stuff like that. And through my misconceptions of my Instagram account and wanting everyone to just charge into sustainability, I got really burnt out by trying too hard to influence others to become sustainable, that I let my own practices slip through the cracks. This is where I learned how important being holistically sustainable is. And I noticed a direct correlation to my mental, emotional, and physical well-being, which altered my motivation to be sustainable, which now that I say it sounds obvious, but when going through these things in real time, it can be easily confused with feeling like it's inability or incompetence to be able to live sustainably conscious instead of recognizing it as burnout. Which is why for me, being holistically sustainable is being aware of how things around us can burn us out, or if we don't take care of our mental, physical, and emotional well-being, we're not going to be able to further implement these things that we care about. And I took my understanding of this and rebranded my account earlier this year, which is exciting. And that was basically 2 years of me creating my sustainability page. So I don't want it to come across as, I immediately figured this out within a couple months. No, like this was a long journey. I started my journey 6 years ago. I created my page 2 years ago. And I just now rebranded and understood the fact that burnout is a thing. So no matter where you are, it's totally fine. Learning about stuff is part of the journey. And by doing so, I've recently been able to have like amazing opportunities arise to advocate for environmental and social justice to a larger audience, such as right now, regardless of having less than 400 followers on my Instagram account, simply by others seeing that I have interest in bettering the world we live in and being proactive in doing so. I've been connected to opportunities such as the Sustainability Summit, as well as a career fair coming up in the beginning of November, where I'll be giving like a couple presentations to, I think it's middle schoolers. And that's actually a middle school that I attended. So it's kind of nice to be back in the community where I grew up and then be able to help others in their career, but also understanding stuff like holistic sustainability on a deeper level. And all of this is basically for me to say that no matter how big or small the sustainable practice is that you're wanting to take part in, it can cause major waves of change in both the short term and the long term. I posted things like buying reusable travel cutlery on my page, and started with like thrift shopping finds, sustainable giveaways, facts about plants, like that was so exciting for me and everything, but it might not be exciting for other people. My own personal artworks, I did eco art for a short amount of time, which was pretty fun. And local small businesses, I posted about that. And then like all of those things are very important. And I love that I started out that way and I'm still talking about those things on my page. But it's to show that these small things then evolved into things like talking about mental health, advocating to stop the landmark on the sound demolition in front of the Des Moines City Council, activities I'm trying to get into to better my life, events I'm attending to surround myself within my community, daily life adventures, and now even a sustainability summit that I have the pleasure to take part in. And I just want to shift away from the idea of sustainability just being about recycling or planting trees or composting, and can be things like holding companies accountable for their ecological footprint or educating ourselves on environmental and social justice and how we can play a part in helping our communities thrive, or sneakily implementing sustainable practices in an organization where I'm employed at, even if this business itself has no correlation to the sustainable or environmental social justice issues. And I'm speaking, that was a very, very detailed example because I'm speaking from experience. At every place that I've worked at, I've tried to make a goal for myself to sneakily implement sustainable practices without people like really noticing it, because for some reason, if you label it as that to people who aren't very keen about it, they'll immediately shut it down. I used to work at a construction company and I was a administrative assistant, and I implemented things like I was in charge of buying things. So instead of getting regular wasteful stuff, I was buying like either compostable versions of them, or something that I know used like reusable materials to create it and stuff like that. So even if you're at a place like a construction company, there are ways to implement things, and also just advocating. I used to work at a clinic, and they didn't recycle at the time of me being there. I don't know if that is still the case. I'm really hoping that they still recycle. But while I was working there, I started recycling, and then encouraged other employees there to recycle and taught them how to actually properly recycle. Um, so ways, just like there's so many ways to be holistically sustainable. Um, and looking at sustainability as a mindset instead of required actions that people feel are out of their way is something that is very important to understanding people's motivation to become sustainable in the first in the first place. And that is how I've come to understand creating a larger systematic change. It's hard to get people to do something that they don't want to do. So we have to understand their motivations or the communication style, or why they would want to change their ways, essentially. There's a small town in Japan, I want to say, I think it's called Kamakatsu, and they live a zero waste lifestyle, and it wasn't the case all the time. They had actually implemented that, and before, I think I remember there was like a video that I had watched about it, where they explained that the people of the town were very opposed to shifting to zero waste, because before they could just throw their things into one hole and call it good. But then they implemented 45 categories of waste segregation, which is amazing and also terrifying to people who don't really know what's going on. And so it was really interesting when watching that video. I would recommend you all to search it up. It's a town called Kamakatsu. I think it's Kamkitsu. And basically, and I think it's from the Insider or the Bloomsburg, I want to say. And in that, it basically just explains that when people see it as just part of their life and something that they kind of forgot is an extra step for them to do, it's a lot better for them to just be like, oh yeah, this is just kind of what I do, instead of being like, oh, I have to now remember 45 categories and do this and that. But once they've gotten that down, it's like, oh yeah, this is like the back of my hand. So it's really interesting. I think that's a very important way to go about our sustainable business practices. And for example, my specific passion for sustainability and just lifestyle is being sustainable while being socially and humanly sustainable. By this, I mean prioritizing our mental, emotional, and physical well-being prior to and alongside implementing sustainable practices to our everyday lives. And basically my question was, how are we supposed to add more to our days if doing what we're currently doing is already difficult enough? Sometimes just living life is very difficult, or getting from point A to point B is very difficult, and we have to be conscious of that, and not shame people for not being able to, or not being given the opportunities to, or the privilege to, because honestly, I do believe sustainability is a privilege to take part in the kind of society that we live in, with income gaps and houselessness, resources, lack of resources, and etc. So I had to learn that, like, even living with my family, they grew up in a third world country where recycling isn't really a thing. You throw trash on the side of the road, and just like the system overall. And it's not because the country itself wants to be that way, it's because they had been forced to be that way, through history and all that had happened. And so kind of checking myself, because I would get really frustrated with my family with not implementing the sustainable practices that I was just showing them or wanting to take part in, or like I could see that it makes such a big change, but to them it's like it's dreadful almost to have to understand it because they lived a very different lifestyle. And also being a part of that meant having to spend extra or do something that they didn't have the opportunity to. So even though we have the opportunities to sometimes, we should definitely not be forcing it upon others or making them feel bad, because we never know what the situation actually is. And so basically I went off on a really emotional tangent there. But after I had my whole learning curve for burnout, when getting into my sustainability account, I took a long break from posting and decided to go about life in different perspectives. Um, and I realized I was focusing too narrowly on the influence I wanted to play on social media, because I felt I was too shy and too timid to do larger scale things in real life. So I kind of held myself back from opportunities, just kind of telling myself that I couldn't do it. And I wanted to shift out of that. And I wanted to show myself that I am capable of doing anything I want. And before I can encourage others to grow, I first have to. Um, and this actually led to me resigning from my job at the time, where I was an administrative assistant, and told myself I'd work really hard to find a meaningful job that speaks to me. And I ended up getting accepted to an internship and starting it only a few days after my last day of resignation, which was pretty crazy because as I resigned, I had nothing in line, but I applied to something, and I interviewed for, I had 2 interviews within that time frame, and then literally started it maybe like 3 days after my last day. Um, and so this internship was also something that completely shifted my narrative of holistic sustainability. It was with Golden Bricks Events. I was first their event planning intern, and then I was later their project coordinator. Um, but basically it shifted my narrative because it embedded environmental and social justice to getting BIPOC folk outdoors, which is something crucially important in sustainability. How do you get people to care about our environment when we're scared to be in it, or we've had so much history in the past of not being allowed to be outdoors as BIPOC folk, and just a lot of trauma around it, what we see in the news. Why would we want to partake in that? And so being in this internship really showed me how the reason why I was shy and timid was because I was fearful. I was fearful of going outdoors, even though I loved it. You know, sustainability is my passion. It's very easy to get fearful of it because of everything that has happened, and being suppressed over time, and just internalizing these kinds of fears. Um, and that kind of goes back to my definition of holistic sustainability, where it prioritizes mental, emotional, and physical health in order to come into sustainability stronger than ever and be able to implement these sustainable practices in our lives and then also in our business operations. Because you have to actually be able to understand where it's coming from to be able to motivate other people to care. Um, and no matter how small it may seem, I wanted to just state that, like, don't underestimate the power of taking small steps to reach larger ones. My sustainable journey started just over 6 years ago and was only given the larger scaled impact opportunities through doing the smaller scaled ones. Um, it's easy to look at our lifestyles and get overwhelmed or feel guilty that it's not as sustainable as we'd like for it to be, which I understand completely. I talk myself out of that every single day. We have to recognize that we should focus on things we have control over and to make sure we're not burning ourselves out in the process. And if you get burnout by trying to get yourself to live a sustainable lifestyle that cannot get sustained long term, we're only going to fall in the same cycle. And we have to understand that having a balance of sustainability and being able to actually sustain those practices in our lifestyle, whether it be advocating, policying, implementing sustainable practices into our businesses, spreading awareness, educating ourselves, and more. But yeah, overall, it's to holistic sustainability to me has so many different perspectives, and I think it's ever evolving through my lens, all of your lenses, experiences, and it's a really interesting time to be a business owner, wanting to have sustainable change because we have the power to shift the narrative. And I hope that this was helpful in understanding that.
Thank you so much. Just have to like click 7 different things. Thank you so much. I appreciate your perspective so much. And I just wanted to call back to 2 things you said because they're like stuck in my brain now. One is the idea of doing more good rather than doing less harm. I actually have never heard that quote before, and I just think it's so cool because it's, I think, easy when you're in the sustainability sphere to constantly feel like you have to reduce your own consumption, you have to reduce how much you're driving, you have to reduce how much you're traveling, you have to reduce. But like a lot of the contributions that we can make in this space and in society in general is by adding ourselves to these spaces, by adding our perspective, which is different from other people's perspective. And so I really love that, that just like little nugget. And then the other one is that you said before, I can encourage others to grow, I have to. And I think that that's so cool because it gives space for us to change and grow, and sort of requires some introspection, not so that we can be perfect, but so that we can like bring our full selves to these conversations. And I love that. And the last thing I wanted to say before we jump into questions is you talked about being sneaky within your organizations. And I've actually been trying to find time for like literally 12 years to write a book called how to combat climate change in your community without anybody noticing. And I actually like wrote up a treatment, and it just like hasn't happened yet. But I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of like, how do you do good things without having to call it sustainability? How can you reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your community without having to implement, like a emissions reduction program? And like, basically, how can you do these things? Thank you. Moji said, write it. I'm trying. And I love that idea of like it doesn't matter if other people aren't there to support you. Like, a lot of us have capacity within the organizations or communities that we're in to make changes that are really impactful, even if we don't have a lot of power, right? So even just like sometimes changing the landscaping in the grass strips can like reduce how fast people drive, which reduces emissions, which reduces car accident, which reduces kids fatalities, like makes it more makes people more able to walk, all these different things. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your journey. And I'm going to check the chat now to see if we have any questions. I know we have some praise here. Second. All right. If anybody has questions, please feel free to raise your hand, video on or off, and ask questions, or pop it in the chat, and we'll ask. They have some more questions. I have some, but I suspect you all do too. So I'm going to wait a second. All right, well, we'll see if anybody else has any questions. But one question I had for you was about the historic preservation project that you're working on, and if you could give us an update on sort of why anybody was trying to destroy this like amazing local historic building, and then what like the prognosis is, like that now that you've been involved with it for a while, and see whether you think you can save this historic building.
Yeah, to reiterate, it is the Landmark on the Sound, and it is based in Des Moines. Um, and it's something that I have been recently working on because of a demolition permit that got submitted to the city. And the history around it was that it used to be a Masonic home, and there was kind of a lot of swip swapping with um, who was going to be the like have ownership of the land. um, and it basically became to a point where it was not affordable to keep it and renovate it with the ownership with the Masonics. Um, and the whole history behind the building itself was also very beautiful, where it was a space for care for elderly in the community, and just the history of Masonics as well. And it was a real tragedy to hear about that they were planning to demolish it because the ownership had shifted to, I think it's Zenith. Um, and it was basically I got involved in it and advocated for its preservation. And right now we're in a waiting period because the EIS had closed, and there's still opportunities to speak in front of the city council in Des Moines. But right now it's basically just waiting on the city to make their decision on what they would like to do with it, and with all of the community's input in play, um, and kind of the way like it's not even something that they are considering to preserve, which is the wildest thing to me because it's a huge building. There's like a fountain in front of it, um, all of the good stuff. And there's pictures that I've shared on my social media and everything. Um, but demolishing it does so much ecological harm. And there's literally a adult care center right next to it. Like it's a in-home care facility. There's so it's not just like the pollution and stuff like that. It's real people right there that could be in direct harm as well. Um, so we're just spreading awareness right now, still pushing out information, speaking at city councils, attending city councils, making sure that the city knows that we're still caring for it. And I think it's going to take about, I want to say it can take about 9 months to determine. But yeah, just kind of in that waiting space.
All right, we have time for one more question. And then if you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And if we have time later, we can loop back. I believe Raihab will be with us the whole time today. So Moji asks, what are your favorite ways to connect with others around holistic sustainability?
Ooh, I love going to community events. That is something that I have been doing this past year, and have realized the way to connect with people is face to face. And in the period that we have with COVID, it's been difficult to do so. So taking any opportunity that I have of going to events, like when I partook in my internship at Golden Bricks Events, they actually host a outdoor camping festival where BIPOC folks come out and they camp for a couple days, and it's basically just a safe space for them. Everything's basically done for them. You just register for the ticket, attend. I've always been a volunteer. Um, so speaking to everyone there with like-minded goals about environmental and social justice, and then also explaining to them, because someone could have a lens of being an advocate on social justice, and then I could be an advocate of someone with environmental justice. And so coming together, understanding each other, and then being like, oh, we can implement these kind of things in what we're doing, and then coming out of that space and then going into our lives again, and then having that spread to other people has been something that I've noticed has been the biggest change for holistic sustainability. So I absolutely love it. And you can go to local things like I went to like a fermentation class, talk to people there. I've gone to block parties in Seattle, and talk to vendors there. So it doesn't have to be just the attendees. It could be the actual people there as vendors as well. So it's just a really cool way to talk to all kinds of people.